freewheeling militia violence that is taking place in Tripoli, and particularly in our case, around, a lot of the violence is around our embassy, but not on the embassy. But nevertheless, it presents a very real risk to our personnel. So we are suspending our current diplomatic activities at the embassy, not closing the embassy.
When it comes to the intersection of battles, decisions, strategy, and intelligence, there may be no one better informed about that grand scope of such matters than one who has worked for or at the Central Intelligence Agency. And as we take into account the current conflagration in the Middle East and so many other places, the ever-watchful eye on Iraq and Libya, and even keeping a watch on what happens on the southern border, we turn to the expert. Welcome to MidPoint, a 24-year member of the CIA, station chief of Hezbollah operations globally, and leader of multiple deployments for the Counterterrorism Center. Gary Berntsen joins us today. Gary, thanks so much for being here.
Pleasure to be with you today.
Gary, I want to start out, first of all, in Israel. We have so much to cover here, but let's start there. 16,000 reservists are being called in now. It is more of a ground war. From a tactical standpoint, and from your knowledge of tactics and the way things go in battles, and even at the beginning of battles here, is there not, and the world is asking this, a more tactically sensitive way, if you will, or effective way to go after the actual enemy without inflicting so much civilian casualty?
The problem, of course, with the Israelis fighting Hamas is that Hamas is a very dense urban area. The Hamas fighters have embedded themselves in the civilian population, frequently firing from civilian positions. And then you have the problem of Hamas radio stations frequently calling out to people to go to these sites to be martyred. This is all done with an eye toward painting the Israelis in the worst possible light. The Israelis, of course, had accepted several early requests for a ceasefire. They were willing to do that, and Hamas continued to fire rockets. The Israelis are in an asymmetrical fight against Hamas there, who is not only using rockets and putting civilians around them, but they're tunneling into their territory. And these are, not sort of the normal challenges that most militaries fights, that most militaries have to face. So Israel, of course, is having to, learn as they do in this case of fighting the tunnels. I think that the decision on the Israelis' part to extend the fighting here is based on, this is the first time they've actually been faced with this large a number of tunnels that had been created. It was an assessment larger than they believed, and they want to make sure that they're able to degrade as much of this asymmetrical threat as they can at this point. The additional 16,000 troops, my understanding is they're going to employ those and take some of these fellows that are fighting there and men and women off the battlefield to give them a break. And this is a new group going to be inserting itself in there. It's not an expansion of the fight, but this is a very complex battle. It's an information operations fight between Israel and Hamas, both putting out their voice, putting out their messaging. Hamas, having the assistance of a very broad number of other groups, whether you're talking about, the governments of Qatar and Turkey and others across the Middle East. Israel, with many of its support in the United States. But the interesting thing is Egypt refused to come in on the side of Hamas on this one. And people should take note of that.
Is it as simple then to say that because of the battlefield, because of that dense area that we're talking about here right now and the tactics of the enemy, simple to say that it is simply impossible to go in there in a ground operation to try and quote-unquote clean out the enemy and do everything you can, trying to save as many people as possible? You just have to do it the way it's doing now. Is that tactically correct?
Urban battles like this are costly in terms of civilian casualties and in your own casualty. The Israelis did not want to have to do this, clearly didn't want to have to do this. But if you look back at many of the great urban fights that have taken place in cities, if you looked at Stalingrad, where the Russians and the Germans were fighting in World War II in a series of blocks, a very narrow strip, not unlike Gaza, you can see the costs of these types of fights. And, the people of Israel and the military of Israel, they're not thrilled about this at all. They're going to take this opportunity now to try to degrade that threat as much as possible. But you are correct in saying there's no easy way to do this, without casualties. But they're employing, trust me, and I've seen this, they're employing technology. They're trying to do this as tightly as they can. but you can't do it perfectly.
Let's say something else simply then. Let's turn to another country in the Middle East, Libya. There is now a consensus from people that I've spoken to, but you're the expert, so I ask you, that Libya is gone. That's it. It's over. As far as we're concerned, we are right back in the hell that Libya once is, and it is an unsavable country at this moment because of what is going on there. How would you react to that?
I will say that, you know, Libya is a place where you have warring factions, and until they're able to sort out their own internal situation, the international community is not going to be able to assist them. They have made war on one another. They are fighting over the spoils of Gaddafi's wealth. They have cannibalized his military into a number of different positions, around the country, geographic positions. And until they themselves come to some sort of internal, resolution of a power structure that the international community can deal with, they're going to be on their own. And you can see that there's not many folks left in there to assist them with this. And it's I won't say it's gone, but it could be a couple of more years of bloodshed until they sort this out themselves.
Could the same thing then be logically said about what ISIS is doing in Iraq, that even though there is a quote-unquote government there, that if you want to be absolutely real in this whole situation and look at it honestly, that this is not going to change. ISIS is in power. They're going to be there for a while, and there's not a lot that external forces can do?
ISIS is the most dangerous national security threat to the United States that exists. Understand this, bin Laden, at his peak in the 1990s, never had more than $30 to $50 million at his disposal to conduct attacks on the United States. ISIS stole more than $450 million from one bank in Mosul and probably got $1 billion out of that city. So their wealth is so much greater than Al-Qaeda ever had. That's the first point. The second point is bin Laden lived off of other countries. He was in Sudan for a while. He had a base of operations there, a base of operations in Afghanistan. ISIS now controls 3 times the territory of Lebanon. ISIS also has, estimated by foreign intelligence services, at least 1,000 individuals with foreign passports, and that is passports from Belgium, the Netherlands, France, England, America. An American citizen from Florida last week did a suicide bombing on a Syrian checkpoint over on the Syrian side of the border for ISIS's territory. These are disturbing trends, and we are going to, and though Americans may not want to have much interest in ISIS is interested in us. Very interested in us.
Couple of minutes
and
I have left here.
To fight these people at some point, but let me continue.
Please.
1 second quickly. What we need to do there is the following. We cannot cooperate with Assad in Syria. We cannot cooperate with ISIS. We cannot cooperate with the Iranians, truly. The only group that we can influence is the Iraqis. We need to convince the Iraqis that they need to drop Maliki. They need to push Maliki out. We need a government that will be more responsive to the actual idea of Iraq, and that would be an inclusive Iraq with Shia, Sunni, and Kurd. And that element we could arm and work with to fight ISIS. But so long as Maliki is in power, he has conducted himself horribly. It is his fault that the country collapsed. He put in cronies into senior positions in the military, and 3 divisions were overrun by the equivalent of a brigade, which was, a 3,000-man unit overran 20,000 people because of just poor leadership on the Iraqi side. This is all Maliki's making. He's a disgrace. He needs to be driven from office.
Less than 60 seconds. I want to get this point, and you mentioned the kind of money that's being flown around here. Isn't it fair to say, and this article's now come out recently, that a lot of ransom money is being paid in Europe right now to a lot of these terrorist groups, and they are making tens of millions of dollars on ransom that is never seen again?
Well, of course, we've had the problem with ransom, with hijacked ships on the eastern Africa, and you're talking over by the Somali side. But now what we're seeing across the Sahel is groups like Al-Shabaab and groups like Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb. They're kidnapping people, they're ransoming them back, and they've figured out that, the term of hostages to fortune works quite well for them. And you literally have platoon, 40-man, and company, 160-man size elements conducting kidnappings and enriching themselves. And this enrichment is all going to be used for conducting war on the West. We are in a war of civilizations with these people, unfortunately now. And they will be making war on us. At some point, the West will have to wake up and recognize that we need to take greater offensive action against ISIS and against the terrorist groups that you talk about in Africa.
Gary, very well put. We're going to have you back again on quite often as we talk about this and figure out how to defeat these enemies. We thank you for your time, my friend. All right, later on this hour, why the battle for a sports franchise is far from over. That and a whole lot more as MidPoint continues, because we question everything.